while. I don't know if Facebook Live is going to work tonight, unfortunately, but I don't want to delay anymore, so we will get started. And I just want to say a quick hello again, and thank you all for coming to tonight's presentation. I'm Nicole Babby, not usually the face you guys see on these, but I'm usually the woman behind the screen dealing with all these technical difficulties. So I am the Membership and Programs Director here at the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation. I'm sure many of you are familiar with us, but for anybody who is not, our wonderful organization has been around since 1977, and we promote the preservation and enhancement of the architectural, cultural, and landscape heritage of Saratoga Springs. And we're thrilled to be able to offer programs like this for free to you all, so we can all meet virtually and say hello. But I also want to give a quick reminder, because I'd be remiss if I did not, that we are a membership-based nonprofit, and so our members mean the world to us. They're the reason why we can keep doing what we're doing. So if you're not a member, I will put in our chat box a link so that you can see in the chat and click to it, become a member. Or give a donation. We always appreciate anything that people can do, and it just helps us continue to bring these programs to you. And just to overall continue our mission, which we do through our educational programs like this, and like our wonderful strolls that we put on, through our advocacy work by providing technical assistance to building owners, and our rehabilitation projects. So that is everything that we do. And again, I'll include like a link to our membership, a link to our donation page in the chat if you want to click it. If we make it over to Facebook, we'll have a donate button over there. And then that just reminds me that I do want to cover, if you don't know where the chat is, I'll go over that again really quick. It is down. If you look, there should be like a little chat bubble that says chat underneath it. You may have to click your screen if you're on an iPad or cell phone, or if you're on a computer, just move your mouse around and it should pop up to say chat. And then you can type into that box if you have questions, if you want to tell a story, anything like that. Feel free to use that chat. I will be monitoring it. If we get Facebook up and running, I will be monitoring it over on Facebook. So we will hopefully have a great conversation, and I will interject. I'll let Carol know when we have some questions, and otherwise we'll save them to the end. So now that we've gone through all of that, I would love to introduce to you Carol Godette, who was born and raised in Saratoga Springs, and she and her husband Dave live in her Nelson Avenue childhood home where they raised their 2 children. She taught 5th grade for 31 years at both Greenfield Elementary and Lake Avenue schools, and she is the co-owner of the local Ben & Jerry's franchise. And for the past 4 years, she's been writing about former Saratoga Springs mom and pop shops for Simply Saratoga Magazine. And we are thrilled to have her here tonight to put on this awesome program. Mitch Cohen, who Carol had very graciously invited to join us, unfortunately had a bike accident earlier today. He will be fine, but unfortunately cannot join us for tonight's program. So Carol and I are going to field Mitch's section at the end, which is about the actual like how-to research. So bear with us on that, but Mitch gave us his slides in advance, so we should be okay. So Mitch, I just want to give everybody a little background on Mitch because he does play such an integral role in this. He retired and now lives on Nelson Avenue with 2 doors down from Carol. So luckily they can be history nerds together, which is wonderful. And he lives in an 1861 2-story Italianate with his wife, Susan. And Mitch and his wife undertook an extensive rehabilitation of their home, which is featured in the recent issue of Simply Saratoga Magazine. And you can learn all about him and the rehabilitation and the history of his home at Simply Saratoga Magazine. And I will be sure to put that link in the chat box too. So if you want to go visit it. Otherwise, we'll also get all of this information on our website next week. So feel free to definitely check us out there. This presentation is being recorded, so we will have the presentation. We will have Mitch's slides up, and we will put links to that Simply Saratoga magazine as well. And now we can get started, and I will turn it over to Carol.
Okay. All right. So you can imagine my surprise. At first, I thought it was April Fool's when at 4:30, Mitch texted me and said, "Carol, I'm in the hospital. I don't think I'm going to be able to join you today. I had a bike accident," and we had practiced this a lot, and because I think whenever you want to research your house or a business, it always helps to have somebody to bounce things off of. And Mitch happened to move here at a perfect time. And so I bounced a lot of things off him. And so hopefully I can fill in his part because he's not here to do it. So you can already see my title slide, which I didn't have a chance to correct, with special guest Mitch Cohen in spirit. So as Nicole said, I write a column for Simply Saratoga, and before that I was a teacher. And as a teacher, I used to go to a lot of children's authors workshops. And I was at this one workshop, and you maybe can see this, maybe not, but there was a children's author who wrote this book called On This Spot. And she talked about how you should just look out your window to see the history of what happened on the spot where you were. And this book takes New York City and it goes back through time, and it goes back to prehistoric time. But I thought, what a cool way to teach history. So I used to try to do that sometimes for certain lessons. And then after I retired and I started writing, I said, what a cool way to write a column, to kind of think what happened on this spot. And some of you may have been here the last time when I did the Adirondack Trust Company, and I kind of went through that history. And then I kind of had this idea about doing my house. And my husband said, well, what's interesting about our house? And if you've been, I know I was looking at some of the people here. I know the Wilders walk by our house all the time. I see my neighbor across the street, Sue Davis. And compared to the houses in my neighborhood that are painted multiple colors and these beautiful Victorians with wraparound porches, our house is just a basic cedar shake bungalow. And so it doesn't look like anything interesting could happen there. As Nicole mentioned, I've lived here since 1964. My parents bought the house from John Sexton, and he was the principal of the high school. And so that was probably the most famous thing at the time that I could think of about our house. Mrs. Sweeney, her daughter, was my close friend, and I think Reenie's on, at least she told me she was going to be on tonight. Mrs. Sweeney always used to say, Carol, that was a burial ground. And I really wished I had asked her more questions. I guess when I was younger, I just said, oh, nice, whatever, and didn't really think about it. Lore in our neighborhood was that Native Americans were buried here. We're just up the hill from the High Rock Spring, which was where the Native Americans came first originally, and the first white men. I know you've probably seen that marker about Sir William Johnson going down to test the waters. And so it just made sense to me that if someone had died and they needed to bury their dead, they would just go up the hill. So I always thought, and as did other neighbors, that this was a Native American burial ground. And I never really thought anything else of it. But then I often go to the bolster collection when I was working on columns on the mom and pop stores. And one day, John Connors said to me, Carol, we have some pictures of your house. And I said, really? And so if you're ever interested in your house or your business, I suggest one place to start is at the bolster collection. I was surprised at the number of just regular houses that are in that historic collection. And the reason is that George Bolster took them for insurance purposes. And many insurance companies had him take pictures. I know on the corner of Nelson and North, kitty corner from Mitch's, I came across a picture there once that was done for insurance purposes. So I got to see our original house. And if you kind of think of our house today, you could see it's basically the same. Still cedar shakes. Then it had some awnings and it had a screened-in porch that we've enclosed now, but it looked more or less the same. So that was okay, but this next picture really just amazed me. The next time you're on Nelson Avenue, you look down, our neighbor's house next door, the Moores, is pictured in this picture. They had a fire, so it looks a little different on the outside, but basically still the same. The hill looks the same. You can see the Van Ralt Mill in the distance. And on the back, it said FHA, June 5th, 1935, Sexton House. And I looked at this picture and I was blown away because I was like, who are all these people? I recognized, and I see my sister's on. I may unmute her at some point. She might not like that. She's in Maine. But I remember Mr. Sexton. He was her high school principal, and he's the man in the middle holding a little girl's hand. And I knew they had 4 children, and there's another boy there and his wife, but I had no idea who these other people were. But I just kind of filed it away and said, well, that's kind of cool. And my mom had always said something about an FHA mortgage, but I really didn't know much about that. So I think I sat on this picture for maybe 5 years. Ironically, when the Sextons left, and Pam can chime in on this one too, they left behind a lot of things. They left behind all their kids' high school yearbooks. And I kept thinking someday they're going to come back and they're going to want these yearbooks, but they never came back until 2 years ago. My husband and I were outside and this woman pulled up and she said, my grandfather built that house. And I said, oh, Mr. Sexton? She said, yes. And her mother is that little girl in the picture holding the hand of her father. She was 4 years old at that time. Elizabeth and I have become pen pals. We talk probably every other day. And she went on this journey with me. So I always think if you're going to do a research, it's nice to have somebody to go along on that journey with you who's as excited about it as you are. What really got me going on this were maps. And I think a starting point for any of you who are just interested in either where you live or a certain spot in Saratoga is to look at old maps. Tom Denny, I often refer to him because he's an inspiration to me. One day we were at his camp in the Adirondacks, and it's beautiful Crane Mountain site. And I should have been out looking at the beauty of nature. And he said, have you ever seen these maps? And I put the link here, and this will be up later for you. If you've never seen this Skidmore exhibit map, it's a collection of 12 maps. I see a few people nodding their heads. And I started looking at these maps and I was gone for the rest of the afternoon. The first one that really caught my attention was an 1820 memory map. And it's considered to be one of the first maps ever of Saratoga. An older woman dictated this map from her memory. And you can see an arrow pointing at, and I know the map's a little small on the slide, so you might not be able to see what it says, but it says Joel Sadler Cemetery. And that's about where my land was. So that kind of had me curious. As you look at the rest of the map, and I encourage you to go on the Skidmore site and look at this map, there's not a lot there, but that was there. I love the John Bevan maps, and I ended up buying and framing this. Looking at the Bevan map, and that's done, they say circa 1850. I've got a blue arrow pointing to where our land would be, and it just says cemetery, and it's rather large. Some other things you might notice, Pearl Street is now called North Street, and it didn't extend all the way. There's some other things I'm going to mention in a little bit, but if you look near the cemetery, it has names, and those are some of the early landholders, and they're the people who own the land. So what stuck in my mind was J.H. Peters. And And that name will come into play in a little bit. I'll mention, well, actually, I guess I'll tell you now. So I remembered this, and later on, I go to the city historian, and there was a letter from our longtime mayor, Addison Mallory. He was our mayor for 30 years in Saratoga. Actually, his wife was my kindergarten teacher. And Mayor Mallory wrote in this letter, he said, when I was a youngster, we played in what was formerly known as Peter's Cemetery. So you see, it says Peter's. I had never heard of it called that. And he described where it was. And he said, halfway down the hill on Nelson Avenue, there was a lot of sand, but there was level ground where we played baseball. Occasionally we'd find a bone. And that really grabbed my attention. Mitch turned me on to the World Harvard maps, and he's on this site a lot. And later on, when Nicole does his part of the presentation, she's going to show you some slides he had. And Mitch is a real master at taking this map, and as you can see along the side, these are all the maps on the Harvard site, and he lays them over each other so you can see over time how things changed. In this particular map, it's the 1876 Kramer map, and again, you see it being a cemetery. This is probably my favorite map. I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen this. This is the bird's eye. It's called the Burley Bird's Eye View map. And this is the one where I spent hours on, because you can manipulate your mouse and you can bring something up and make it large. And so I did that with the area I live in. And where Mitch here, we would talk about, you could see the arrow and you see a house there, and that's Mitch's house. And it was built, this map is 1888. So this is an 1888 map. Now you can see that North Street's there. But this really got my attention because you can see the other arrow where our property is, and it's just this big mound of dirt. When I saw this map, I got thinking, well, it had to be Native Americans because that's how they buried their dead, in mounds. And you just see this large mound of dirt. And anybody have any questions about this map? Or I don't see any questions. Nicole, no questions coming in?
Not yet, but if anybody does have questions, just to remind everybody that you can put it in the chat box. Let us know if you have any questions, and I'm just going through and making sure that everybody's here. And if you need me, just feel free to start waving your hands even. I'm clicking through everybody's pictures.
Okay. So anyway, if you're interested in doing some research, I think a logical starting spot is on maps, but also, of course, looking at deeds. So I went back and I looked at the deed. I looked at my parents' deed, and Mitch is going to touch on this later on too, about how to do a search for deeds, and maybe some of you have. But I looked back at the sexton's deed, and I've underlined the part where it describes the land, and it says on the burying ground on Nelson Street, now Nelson Avenue. So what I need to talk to you about is this street used to be called Nelson Street, and it's pretty narrow down at our end, but it was widened from what it once had been. And when it was widened, it then became Nelson Avenue. But originally, it was called Nelson Street. So I looked back at the deed, and it just says burying ground, but it doesn't say what kind of burying ground. It doesn't even name it. So I remembered that photograph. And when I decided to start researching our house, another great spot to do is look at newspapers. And I had that date from the back of the photo. So I started at the Saratoga room. I took the Saratogians out on microfiche, and I just went through the June 1935 Saratogians, and I came across this article, and I was so excited. And it says the groundbreaking for the Sexton home. And so on June 15th, 1935, was the first day that FHA mortgages were issued in the country, and 2,600 were issued. And ours, our property, was one of 67 started in New York State that day. So it all happened on the same day. And that explained who all these people in the picture were. And it explained the mayor was there, and it talked about the shovels. You saw the shovel. And I was so excited that I contacted Elizabeth, the little girl in that photo, whose daughter had shown up at my house. And I contacted Elizabeth and I said, oh, I found out who all these people were. And she was as excited as I was. And then she said, oh yeah, that shovel sat next to our fireplace the whole time we lived there, the ceremonial shovel. So another place, if you don't want to go to the library, and right now we can't go and look at microfiche, is looking at newspapers.com. The Saratogians aren't there, but the Post-Stars are there. A lot of the Albany papers are there. And then the Fulton History site as well. And you can find so many newspaper articles on those sites. So if you want to find out about a certain location or where you live, that would be a great place. So by knowing that, I said, okay, I do have one interesting thing to write about an article. We had the first FHA mortgage in the state. Another place to go, of course, is the city historians. And I visited Marianne Fitzgerald's office, which we can't right now. And she had some records, and she said, yeah, here's the Sadler Cemetery. And everybody called it the Sadler Cemetery. And this was the frustrating part, which I'll explain soon. So I also came across this article by William Stone, no relation, but he was a researcher, and he had written a book, Reminiscence of Saratoga and Ballston Spa. And I love this description of the Sadler burying ground. And he said it was by years the oldest cemetery in our city. And I think a lot of people think the Gideon Putnam is the oldest. It's the oldest one that is still in existence. But the Sadler burying ground was the very first cemetery. And it described the conditions, and they sound pretty deplorable. But also it talked about how it kind of got started. So you can see Fern Wadsworth, I believe he was 35 at the time. He was a soldier in the Revolutionary War, and he had come to Saratoga. He was ill, and he came to Saratoga to have the waters down at High Rock Springs. And he didn't feel well, and he ended up dying after he got to the springs. It was quite a trip for him to get there. And they weren't sure what to do with his body. And there was a farmer named Seth Sadler who owned land nearby. He had a house near where now is Van Ralt plant. And he donated the land where my house is to bury him. So it became the first cemetery. And for the longest time, it was called the Sadler Cemetery because of this burial of this first man in 1785 to die in Saratoga, a white man that was buried. So that was pretty interesting when I found this article. However, I had so many questions. I remember, I see Bob Millis is on here, and I remember him asking or commenting on it. I went on like a Facebook site and I said, anybody know anything? Because my sister and I grew up with a dad who was a funeral director, and we know how serious people take the burying of their loved ones. And I was like, okay, if there's a cemetery, how could it be moved? Wouldn't people get upset? And these records said 67 people had been buried here, at least with tombstones with markers. And there may have been more that didn't have markers. And how could you just unearth these people and move them and not have articles written about it? And nothing came up. I looked and I looked, and at this point, I went to my neighbor, Mitch, and I said, Mitch, what am I going to do? And he was really into research. And as Nicole said, a research geek like me. So he said, well, Carol, you have to go on ancestry.com and we have to start looking at graves. And so I was ready to do that. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to go over to Greenwich Cemetery and I'm going to talk to them because a lot of the bodies were moved to Greenwich Cemetery. So Carol Waldron there was amazing. And she had pulled out this little binder on Sadler Cemetery. And in it was a photo someone had brought to her. And this is standing in front of what is now my house. After it was a cemetery, this photo was from 1907. But what really helped me with this was it said Nelson Street. And so I got thinking, maybe this cemetery has a different name. But I loved kind of the field part, and that was a great photo to kind of prompt me on. So Mitch said, okay, Carol, we need to go on Ancestry. One of the things I found out from Carol Waldron's records was there was a kind of a famous person buried here. Rutherford B. Hayes's grandfather. And Rutherford B. Hayes was one of our US presidents. And so as you look at this Find a Grave, it said that he was buried in Sadler Cemetery. And this is the first time I saw an AKA First Cemetery and Nelson Cemetery. And that really helped me by giving it that different name. I had read some articles that said he was moved and they didn't know where his body was, but this said he had been moved to Wilmington, Vermont. I also in one of the news articles found exactly where he was buried. And in this article, it stated how close to the road and how far back. I think it says it in rods. And so my husband knew the conversion and we kind of walked it out and we kind of placed his grave either where our living room is or maybe where my childhood bedroom was. And again, on this journey I was on with Elizabeth, who's 89 years old, I couldn't wait to call her. And I said, guess what I found, where Rutherford B. Hayes's grandfather was buried. And she said, let's just say it was our bedroom. It sounds like a lot more fun than to say the living room. So we pretend it was our bedroom, but we're not really sure. So all of a sudden, after seeing Nelson Cemetery, I went back to the Fulton History site and I started putting in closing in quotes, variations, First Cemetery, and I tried Nelson Street Cemetery. And once I did, I came up with 24 articles on the removal of the cemetery. And all my questions were answered. There was an emergency meeting in July of 1877 to try to get them to move the cemetery. And I need to explain why. The ground, and those of you who've been, it's on a hill. After the streets had been widened, it made the ground a little less stable. When there was a lot of rain, a lot of snow, one day some boys were walking to school and they came upon a skull and they brought it in for show and tell. And the teacher said, where did you get this from? So bodies were starting to wash down the street. And so they had to do something about it. They said, this is not a stable place for a cemetery. So they decided to move it. And so that came across in the article. And then just like you would have to doing something like that, they had to put in notices to let the next of kin know you had 30 days to remove the remains of your loved ones. And a lot of these they were all categorized if they had a headstone, by Durkee. He was a postman, but he also had this as a hobby, and he would go in and he chronicled each person that was buried here. Also, they put out a proposal for someone to move the bodies. So this was really exciting to know, okay, I do now have a good article because this was the first burial ground.
So Carol, you used quotes. So when you're doing this, you have to do quote, Nelson Street Cemetery, end quote. Is that how you were able to get so much information?
Correct. Yes. And I did this on the Fulton postcards, the Fulton history site. And that's how I got all these articles.
And just to remind everybody, again, we'll have all of this information on our website next week. I just want to touch base with Mitch, make sure we have all the links that we need. So you can check out our website next week for more details and all of that. But if you have any questions as we're going along, don't hesitate to ask.
Okay. So here's one of my questions, or I'm hoping somebody out there is going to be able to answer this. I know I did reach out. I saw that Field Horn was on. I reached out to him. This is the only thing left behind, and I'd like to think it was a grave marker. It always was over to the side. We had a shuffleboard in our backyard, and it was always kind of partly under dirt. But after this research, one day I kind of took it out and I cleaned it up, and it says P. Lieb, 1877. That's right around the time that the cemetery was moved. And you can't see all of the detail of this, but it's rather biblical. There's a lamb, there's a bird with little eggs, and I showed it to someone who knew more about this than I, and she said, well, these are the markings generally of a cemetery type thing. So I don't know if it is. Other people have suggested that maybe it's just a garden marker, that P. Lieb was the artist and he just put the date that he made it. I asked Elizabeth if she thought her parents ever bought it, and she said no, she didn't think so. So I don't know. I'd like to think it's left behind from when it was a cemetery, but I don't know the answer to that. So a lot of you are probably saying right now, well, okay, where I live in a condo, or I live in an apartment. Probably nothing happened there. So what if I live in a condo? So, well, if you live in Park Place condominiums, 262 to 268 Broadway, and this is a picture of the Janicellis. I had them in school in Greenfield, and now they live in one of the condominiums, and they're overlooking the park. So many of you probably remember what this was originally. Originally, it was Convention Hall. Convention Hall, if you live in the Park Place condominiums, perhaps you live over the space where Thomas Dewey was nominated for New York State governor candidate for the Republican Party in 1938, or Teddy Roosevelt announced his return to politics in 1910. This building was designed by Stanford White, who was a famous architect. He was the same architect that designed Madison Square Garden. So it was often called the Madison Square Garden of upstate New York. These postcards, the top two postcards you see, are from Beatrice Sweeney's collection. And I was fortunate enough to get them after her passing. Renee let me have her whole collection. And I think she has 10 different postcards of just Convention Hall. That's how important of a building it is. Inside, you can see it had a capacity of 5,000 people. It was completed in 1893. Numerous sporting events were held there. My sister, who's on, I should unmute her. She probably wouldn't like that. Used to go to basketball games there. St. Peter's and Saratoga High played basketball there. There were many boxing tournaments were held there. That in 1938, the New York State Athletic Commission granted a professional boxing license to have matches at Convention Hall. Lots of entertainers actually were there too. Tragically, on November 14th, 1965, it ignited from a fire jumping across the street. Two boys were across the street at the abandoned Columbia Hotel, and they were having a cigarette, and it ignited. It was a windy day, and water pressure was really low. And they didn't have enough water pressure for the hoses to fight the fire. And I think the building was basically gone within a couple of hours. It left a big gaping hole, which then later was replaced with a YMCA, which at the time was a state-of-the-art building. Of course, now it's a condominium. So there's quite a bit of history if you were to live there. Or maybe you might say, well, what was on the spot of where my business is? And I had that question. I kind of thought I knew the answer. City directories are a great place. And I know Mitch was going to talk a lot about that. And Nicole, you're going to talk about that?
I'll talk a little about it.
A little
bit for Mitch, but I won't be Mitch level of everything.
Okay, a little bit. So city directories, when I was trying to find out about neighborhood stores, you could look up by category, or you can look up by address, or you could reverse look up. So you can find out lots of information. So I always knew our Ben & Jerry's, like the original Ben & Jerry's, was the only other one that was in an old gas station. And I thought, well, that's probably about all that's happened at this site. But I decided to investigate it, and I found out some really cool things. So as many of you know, this is in an area called the Gut. It's a low-lying area, and it used to flood all the time. When it was a mobile station, so in the top corner, it was Rose's mobile station. And there's a picture of Jerry Rose, and it was flooding, and it flooded all the time. I remember being in college, having to go there on odd, even gas days during the gas crisis. And I remember having to sit there for hours in line. And they really didn't make much money for gas. And Jerry Rose didn't really have this. And Samantha reminded me of this the other day, because she was saying, oh, the person I date used to have his race car there. Jerry Rose was a race car driver, and he got the gas station so he and his friends could work on their race cars there. So every Saturday morning they gathered for coffee, and they worked on their race cars on the lifts. So that's why he had it, but it wasn't always a mobile station. Lucy Kettlewell did this wonderful painting of it being a Flying A gas station, and I love this painting. But before that, probably the most fascinating thing that ever happened is in the lower photo. So as you look at the photo, just take a minute. Anybody know what it's looking at, the direction? Can you orient yourself on that? Anybody wanna, in the chat button box, hazard a guess where we are, what buildings we're looking at?
Is it unfair if I guess? Because I already know.
No, it's not unfair, Nicole.
Oh, look, Mark Yablonsky says towards Congress Park.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. Yeah, I got to mark him down for a free ice cream cone coupon.
Ooh, all right, Mark, I got you. I'll hook you up with a free ice cream coupon.
It's looking toward Congress Park. And on the left in the forefront, you see what's now Bailey's. At the time, and of course, this being the Jewish lively neighborhood, it was Tannenbaum's, and it was a kosher market owned by Regina and Leo Tannenbaum. And it was the only kosher market in that whole area at a time when we had a huge population that would come for the baths and lived here. And across the street, they ended up buying, and again, if Mitch were here, this is another time when I got really stuck. And this is a Robert Jokey picture. Mar Baker, when she bought Bailey's, had him do whole research on the area, and this is her photo. But they had such a demand for produce that they set up a fruit stand across the street, and it was owned by Sunnybrook Dairy. And I said, Mitch, so he helped me find that Mrs. Tannenbaum bought it from Sunnybrook Dairy, and they used it as an overflow for fruit. And their son, who's a lawyer on Wall Street, and I've had several conversations with him, used to go with his dad every morning to Menands, to the fruit stands, and they bring fresh fruit back. But also on this site, there was in Field's book, Centennial Saratoga, Amy Godine, my next door neighbor, wrote about this in her chapter. There was a strong man called the Mighty Adam, and there's a movie about him. There's a book written about him. He used to come down and perform on this corner in the summers, and he sold hair tonic, and he would wrap his hair, very long hair, and his beard around a station wagon. He'd pull it across the lot. So I always think that this is a corner where lots of people gather. So I would love to see a picture of people gathering to watch this strong man pull a car across the lot, and hopefully then buy this hair tonic, because then your hair would be as strong as his. So just an area that just a lot of interesting things happened on.
And
that
Carol,
block.
I want to point out one thing too. In that top picture with the gas pump, that's looking towards Bailey's, what's now Bailey's, which I think it says the Golden Grill Lounge. That's Bailey's entrance. And just in case people didn't notice it, because this blew my mind, this picture is the car driving through the water, and he's standing because that whole road is flooded. So if you look close, I didn't want anybody to miss it, but that's like an awesome picture.
It is. His wife gave that to me, and she had clipped it, and she said, oh, you have to, when I was doing the article, she said, you have to put this picture in. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So another on this spot. So we talked about Adirondack Trust in the last presentation, but I think probably the heart of Saratoga, the most visible corner, is the corner of Broadway and Division. And in the Bevan map, you can see the large area this once took up. It's a little small, but this was the site of the United States Hotel. And there's a photo of it there. And when the United States Hotel was built, it, along with the Grand Union, was the largest in the world, not just Saratoga. And I always think if you just took a camera, and I think I started my article that way, if you were at Uncommon Grounds and you put a time-lapse camera in front of Uncommon Grounds looking at this corner, and you just said, take pictures over 100 years and come back and show me what you got, people would say, oh, no, you move this camera, because I don't think any other corner in our whole city has changed more than this corner. So you can see how large the United States Hotel was. The original, and this is the second one, the original one was completed in 1824, but it burnt down in 1865, and it was rebuilt. And I believe in Field's book, that we should unmute him. He has a photo or a drawing, a depiction, it's not a photo, of the original one. But this had 768 sleeping rooms, 65 suites, an amazing courtyard in the back, and I should have a picture of that. When you stayed there, you had the American food plan, so you got all your meals, so elaborate meals. And it was just sounds amazing. World War II came along, and afterwards they just couldn't sustain it. Now, keep in mind that these hotels were only open in the summer, so they were closed up for basically 9 months a year. So it was taken down but it took a whole year to have it taken down between May of 1945 and 1946, and it left this gaping hole. So what was filled in? Well, Rick Fenton, I saw that you're on there. Can we unmute Rick? If he wants to talk. So 2 nights ago, Rick Fenton wrote me and he said, Carol, I saw you're going to mention the Fingerpaint site. I have a postcard. So Rick, do you want to tell us about this postcard you came across?
Oh dear. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, well, I didn't know I was going to be part of the show.
Well, you're filling in for Mitch because, you know, we were going to play off each other and I don't have him. So.
Well, it was just so random that I came across this email that said you were going to give this presentation, and one of the spots you were going to mention was this spot. And it just sort of resonated with my memory. And many years ago, when I was cleaning out my grandparents' house, I came across a very large collection of, you know, knickknacks and memorabilia and papers. And one of them was this postcard. Actually, there were a couple of them. They were the same postcard. And it turns out my grandmother was working at this place, and she was living on Lake Avenue at the time. And I'm from Rome, New York, and I had no idea that my grandmother had any connection with Saratoga Springs at all. And so she sent this postcard to my mother, and it was postmarked 1948. And I looked at it, and I looked at the little, you know, location description on the bottom, and thought, my goodness, that's not possible. How could that really have ever occupied that site? But sure enough, there it is.
It did. Thank you. That was such a find because I had read about it, but I had never seen a picture of it. It's not in any postcard collection I've ever looked at. So I was so excited to see that. And I think you're right. You're like, how could it fit there after we had this beautiful grand hotel replaced with this? It didn't last that well. I'm not sure exactly when it was taken down, but I do know that the Red Barn came along in 1968-ish. And at that time, fast food restaurants kind of became the trend. But this was before we had historic preservation districts. And so now we probably would try to have something, because we have historic preservation and the Preservation Foundation, more in keeping with the surroundings. And this certainly was not in keeping with some of the surroundings of Broadway, the Red Barn. And oops, sorry about that. Here's another shot of the Red Barn. So the Red Barn then became Pope's Pizza, and I don't have, and if anybody has it when it was Pope's Pizza, I'd love a photo of that as well. So after it was the Red Barn, and it stayed that way for a long time, and Pope's Pizza, it was replaced by Borders, and Tom Frost was the architect, and I love this. I think it was the year was 1999, April 1st, for an April Fool's joke. He submitted this for the front page of the Saratogian, his draft of the new plan for the new Borders, and it looked like a red barn, and so that was great. But of course, it was not designed like that. The picture of Borders is down below, and which is basically the same structure on the exterior we have today when Fingerpaint Designs took it over. Very different inside, but you know, one thing you can say about this corner is that it has changed so much But I also think when you look at the period of time, it always fit with whatever was going on in society. When it was a hotel, that was in vogue. Even when it was in the Red Barn, um, fast food was in vogue. Then we went through a mega bookstore time. And now Fingerpaint Designs, for those of you who don't know, they do marketing. And I know they're working with a lot of companies. When I spoke with one of the owners, which they can't divulge, but they're working with a lot of companies that are working on cures for COVID. So it's a corner where lots of things happen. So we kind of talked a lot about, just touched on how would you go about researching if you wanted to. And so this was the part where Mitch was going to pitch in and kind of give you some nuts and bolts. And when we did our practice yesterday, which we thought was going to be short and ended up being like 2 hours, we realized that he had so much information that we just.
Oh, I don't know if everybody else can see Carol. Has she frozen on anybody else's screens? Okay, just checking. So what she was saying is that,
Decided he's going to do.
Here we go. Oh, Carol, we lost you for a second there. So I'm just going to give a quick recap. So what happened yesterday was Mitch had so much information and I was like, Mitch, you have 10 minutes. so we can't do it. Or we can, but we just kind of have to do the most digestible, easily understood, action-oriented that people can take home and actually start doing themselves. So basically from there, we decided, we roped Mitch into doing a additional program for us at a later date, which is yet to be determined, but he's going to do a more thorough and robust program about doing your own research. So if you're interested in that, please stay tuned. If you're not already on our newsletter, feel free to email me anytime and we can get you hooked up to that just so that you stay up to date on our programs. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, with Mitch's slides. And what I'm going to do really quickly first is in the chat box, put in details about our house history program, which does have about I would say 12 to 15 month wait because we just have so many that we're working on. And with COVID, a lot of our resources are just, they've been closed. So it's put us a little bit behind, but we're still doing them and we love doing them. And I'll talk more about that later too, but I'll put our link to our website in the chat box. If you wanted to go and check anything out, you can do so there. And then bear with me for 1 second to share. Oh, here we go. We're going to share Mitch's program. All right, Carol, are we good? Can we see the screen and everything?
Good.
Okay, so good. And I'm Mitch Cohen, obviously. And so Mitch, he made this wonderful presentation and very luckily sent it to us this morning before his bike accident and him not being able to attend. But again, like I said, we're going to rope him in for another program so that he can do a lot better job than I'm going to do right now. But we will run through, and Carol, feel free to interject wherever I am missing any information or you have additional details or a fun story. All of that is good. As you can see on here, we have the interested in the Building History and Plaque program. I just put that link in the chat if you wanted to check that out. At the end of this, Mitch was very kind and put, please become a member. I'll put the link for that at the end in the chat box again, so everybody can have that. And let's keep rolling. Okay, so overview of the research process. So maps of Saratoga Springs, that's basically, Carol showed great examples and I'm going to show some of Mitch's examples as well, which are just wonderful visual aids. And if you're anything like me, I'm a total visual learner. So it's very interesting to see how properties change over the course of time and just how Saratoga's changed over the course of time, and the street names, the properties, all of that stuff. Deeds are the documents that show the chain of the sellers and buyers, and the sellers are the grantors, the buyers are the grantees. I get confused on that every time I have to look at these. So this is going to be a good reference that we'll put on our website so that you'll know which one's which. And then the city directories, that is a list of all the occupants of that home or building. And then owners and or boarders, as Mitch noted here. The people and their stories. So the research gives us these people's stories. And I loved this quote from Mitch's mother that he included, and it says, "Everyone is the star of their own soap opera." So he felt like he had to give her a little shout out with this for that wonderful quote. But that's really what we find out. Our buildings tell our stories. So it's just so interesting to have all this information and details, and especially in this time of technology where we have a lot of this at our fingertips. And then last but not least, the Saratoga Springs tax rolls, and they determine the year that the property or lot was first assessed. So we'll continue on. So here's where Mitch has all these great links, which we're not going to click on today because A, I'd be afraid that technology will fail us and that our screens would stop sharing, but also that this will just be on our website now. So you can go and you can click these links and find this information, and it's all really interesting. And like I said, a lot of these things you can find hard copy. You can find them at the archives of the city historian, which is at the visitor center, which is closed at the moment. So that's one of the issues that I was talking about. That one's closed. And then the Saratoga County Clerk's office. So you have those options when you're doing your research, but you also have great online resources too. And then here is Saratoga County Parcel Viewer. So it kind of shows all the information here, and we pulled up 308 Nelson Avenue so that you could see Carol's property. Harvard World Map brings you up to a default screen. So then on the left-hand side, you can see all of the check boxes. So this is just the basic base map. And then when you go in, this is the 1852 Bevan map. So you can click it, you see that it changes. And then if we click it again, we're gonna go to the 1858 Chambers map. And then we're gonna click it again, and we're gonna go to the 1876 Kramer map. So you can see all of the different maps that you can view on here.
For the same area. So yeah, so
Exactly.
Mitch was doing it for my house because he kind of helped me along with this process. So he was using that as an example. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's great because you can see that same area change over time. And you can see, obviously on the left-hand side, you can see just the vast number of years that are covered too. So it's really interesting. And then here is a Sanborn map, which these are always just so interesting to look at and understand. And I feel like I learn something new about Sanborn maps every time I look at them, but they're fascinating. And that's the really cool part about all of these things. Even if you're not researching anything and you just want to look at them, they're super interesting just to see how Saratoga has changed over time, or to see where your favorite ice cream shop is, or where your condo is, all of those kind of things. You can see all of these on the maps, which is awesome. So here is map 27 in the Sanborn map. This is the detail. So you can see the red box and where the property looks like.
So that's my house. And at the time of this map, there used to be a little shed in the back. So that's where the little shed is. And Mitch's house is the one that's colored in pink and A. And so it's by numbered.
Yeah, and you can see down on Mitch's house, in front of the A, there's the dotted lines and everything, and that's where the porches are. So you can tell a lot about the structures that are there based on how they're shaped, how they're lettered. In that other map, you saw how they're colored in. That means different things. So these are always very interesting to look at. All right, so that takes us from the really cool visual aspect, and then this kind of gets into the nitty-gritty details that help you with your research. So the deed research must be traced in reverse date order. Again,
can I just add in?
Please
So
do.
Any of you can go on, and you just have to request from the county clerk's office a login. And so they'll give you a temporary login it's good for a few weeks. And you can go in, and if you want to just see the deed of where you're living right now, you can get that. And they usually, the turnaround, like when you write them, you hear back within like 2 hours, even though on the website it said it's a lot longer. And so once you log in, you can do it by name. You can look up your name or someone you know who lived there. And so this is going through using the index books, and this was a little tricky for me. So Mitch helped me with this a lot. And I know if any of you wanted help, he'd help you too.
And this is also why we asked him to do a more thorough program, because once we got into this, we realized it's a lot, and it's a lot to digest, especially if I was only giving him 10 or 15 minutes tops. So definitely stay tuned. We'll announce when we're going to do that next program. But yeah, so here, again, seller is the grantor, buyer is the grantee. Very confusing. Again, this is why it takes time to read through these things. And so I actually want to go to the next page, because here you can see the deed index books. On the left-hand side, you can see David and Carol Godette, and then Richard Stone and wife, and Carol, who was that?
That's my parents that we bought the house from. Yeah.
And then you can see the book and the page number next to their name, next to the grantor name.
So another way to do it is you could actually physically go to the office down in Ballston Spa and then actually look through the books. But I'm not sure right now if you can do that. I don't think.
Yeah, I would be surprised, or it would probably have to be by appointment, but I would be surprised if they were letting a lot of researchers in right now. But luckily it's online too, so you can go and check it out there. So then there's also like the official deed itself.
Mm-hmm. So this is the one prior. I think I had showed the sexton's deed. So this is my parents' deed. But again, here it talks about the burying ground. So that's, again, there.
Yeah, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yep. And then this is a detail about the burying ground here. We'll keep going. So then there's the Saratoga Springs city directories, which are available in the Saratoga room at the public library. They're obviously closed right now for the Saratoga room to researchers, but it's a great resource for when they reopen. And if you've never been to the Saratoga room, it is just as a history nerd, it is a very cool place to go visit. So I highly recommend that you go and visit there once we can all go and visit there. But yeah, so they have the city directories. There's a ton of them available. There's a bunch of them available on ancestry.com, which Mitch started doing research for our house history programs recently. And he is very well versed in Ancestry, which has been really cool because it's not something that we necessarily used prior to this. We were using a lot of other resources, but Ancestry just adds an extra layer to our house histories and to our understanding of who these people were that lived in these buildings.
Yeah, that's how we found Richard Burchard, Rutherford B. Hayes. So that was Mitch who turned me on to that.
Yeah, and then Mitch, as you can see here, like down on where it says keyword, using quotes again, like how important the quotes are when you're doing your research. It's something that it doesn't come natural, or it's something that we think about, but adding those double quotes helps that search so much. And that's how it helped you find the cemetery when you were looking, Carol. Without those quotes, you didn't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, so all of that is cool. Mitch noted at the bottom, ancestry.com, monthly subscription is required. so just keep that in mind if you're using that for research. All right, and then the alphabetic directory. So up here in the top right corner, you can see it's highlighted with John Sexton. So again, it's just different ways for us to come to an understanding about who lived here, verify that we're finding the correct information. So we can just make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and making sure that everything is accurate for the timeframes that we're saying. Oh, and here it is big, so there's that. And then this is where it goes for the numerical street directory or reverse directory. So there's a lot of layers to this, which is again why we want Mitch to do an awesome program that really goes deep, whereas we're just trying to give a quick understanding that you can reference on our website later. But here is that. And again, you see John Sexton. All right, and the people and their stories. So all of these give you an easy way to find out who lived at this address, who were the owners, who were their children, who were the tenants, or the people who occupied these spaces. And it works for businesses or residences. It's all of the, like, you can learn so much history this way. And again, Fulton History is the one that Carol mentioned a lot at the beginning, and that's where we mentioned with the cemetery using the quotes. It's a great website if you've never been on it. So many newspapers, including a lot of the Saratogians. There's New York State historic newspapers, and then trusty old Google is always great to just kind of start yourself off. And that, I feel like Google is the least intimidating of everything, but it's a good place to get started. And then there's the Saratoga Springs tax rolls, which are the tax assessments for those properties. It's really good to find out like when something was a lot and then when it became a house or a building with a lot. Again, those are also found at the visitor center when it is opened. And that's in the city, specifically in the city historian's office, which is located in the center. So access there is limited normally, so you need to make an appointment, but then with COVID, everything is even more limited. So just these are good things to know for once things start to reopen and we can start using all of our resources. All right, Carol, did I miss anything?
I think not. Probably
Okay.
people are ready to go have a whatever.
All right. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming, and we're sorry Mitch couldn't be here to do a much better job than I just did, but hopefully you learned a few things and can find some websites to go and check out after this. And so I am going to touch base with Mitch and just make sure that everything that is in here is what he wanted you guys to have information for. So sometime next week, feel free to visit our website. I will have this all updated on there, but bear with us just because we want to make sure that we have all the correct information and all the links. Mitch was really great about putting links all throughout this, so we're excited to get all that information to you. And since I am the membership and programs director, I have to tell you about what's coming up. We have we sold out for every single summer stroll this year. So we planned an autumn stroll series and programs. So on Sunday with Charlie Kunzel is the Historic Congress Park in Canfield Casino, some autumn stroll. I'm so used to saying summer stroll, autumn stroll. So that's at 10:30. There are only 6 tickets remaining. So if anybody on here wants a ticket, please go to our website, order it tonight because this will sell out. I know it. Harry Warner is doing a tour next Saturday on October 10th of Franklin Square. And that is a wonderful tour to go on, which I'm sure that all of these are going to sell out, so I'll just have that be a underlying factor. If you want tickets, go get them. And then on Sunday, October 18th, there's going to be a tour of the historic West Side. And then we have this wonderful Zoom program today, and then we're going to have another Zoom program on Tuesday, October 27th, and that one is about women's suffrage in Saratoga Springs, and that one's with Nancy Brown. So we want to keep doing all of these programs. We have our Twilight Cemetery tour, which we had to limit to 35 people this year. So get your tickets for that as well. That one is super interesting and it's on Halloween Eve. So Friday, October 30th at Green Ridge Cemetery. It's another just great, super interesting. We learned so much history, especially in Green Ridge Cemetery. You learn so much history about the people who lived here. So it's always very interesting. And I just want to say again, like, if you aren't a member, we would love for you to become a member. You get discounts to our programs. You get notified about things in advance, all of those good things. And then if you would like to make a donation, we would be so appreciative, because that's how we can bring these free programs to you all, is by having you donate and support us. And we know it's been an interesting year, but we have figured out a way to still see you all and be able to enjoy everything about Saratoga history and architecture. And I look forward to the next program that we can do. And hopefully you all can join us again. It will be the same format on the 27th, where it is a Zoom, and hopefully we'll actually be to Facebook Live. If you wanted to watch any of this again, I will also have it on our YouTube page sometime in the next week. So Carol, do you have any?
Oh, no, I just like to thank
comments?
everybody, and thanks for all turning out tonight to listen to these stories. I hope you learned a couple things. And I did want to touch base back to Shelley Riley had a comment, and I know when I got to the part about Ben and Jerry's in the gut, and she mentioned so correctly that it was Montana Bookstore, but to the best of my knowledge, because Jeff Dershowitz owns the building still. He owned it when it was Liz Montana's books. That was in part of and part of it was ice cream. So it wasn't the Ben and Jerry's that we know today. They started off really small. And so it was a bookshop and ice cream. And she was there, I believe, for 2 years. And then she moved up on Broadway. So thanks for mentioning that. If anybody has further questions, contact Nicole. She'll let me know, and I'll get in touch with you. If you have questions, or maybe if you find out what that cemetery urn is, I'm still loving to know that. And thanks a lot for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
All right, I threw my email in the chat box if anybody needs that, but you can find me or call me at the office. And yeah, Carol, I'll relay any questions or comments back to you. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and hopefully we will virtually see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks.